In the year of great change, amidst the peaceful suburb of Saint-Denis, just outside the bustling reach of Paris, a peculiar scene unfolded as dawn's first light struggled to pierce through the damp, chill morning fog. This haze clung tightly to the barren branches of ancient trees, casting a mysterious veil over the landscape. In the subdued glow, faint outlines of something extraordinary began to reveal themselves, something that seemed almost impossible to conceive. The air itself felt charged, alive with a quiet anticipation, as if witnessing the impending birth of a revolution, an upheaval that would ripple through the fabric of Europe's history. No one at that moment knew precisely what this day would bring, nor how tightly destiny's threads would weave together in a knot destined to alter the very face of the continent. Within this silent, expectant atmosphere, Abbad Sugheri, a man of modest stature yet immense ambition, watched as the first tender rays of a pale sun struggled to make their way through the stained glass windows of the new choir of his basilica. However, this was not merely the sun's light. It was a transformation, material woven from divine grace itself, manifesting as a cascade of vibrant colours that seemed to pour from the very fabric of heaven. It was a moment of divine revelation, a testament to grace descending upon the earth in streams of ruby and sapphire hues, illuminating the sacred space with an otherworldly radiance. For Sugheri, this was no ordinary restoration of a church. It was a glimpse into a new theology, engraved in stone and glass, an epoch dawning from the ashes of the old Romanesque heaviness. What he saw was the embryo of a new era, an architectural rebirth that would challenge and transcend previous conventions. He called this creation modern, a marvel of its age, yet future generations would refer to it as Gothic, a term that would forever evoke a sense of daring innovation. This audacious architectural cry, born from the city of Saint-Denis, would echo across the continent, igniting the greatest building race in all human history. As Europe's landscape darkened with shadows, disorganized by feudal warriors, heretics, and the pervasive dread of the unknown, the construction of these soaring cathedrals emerged as beacons of hope. Like tender shoots pushing through the chaos, the skeletal frameworks of grand structures such as Chartres, Rheims, Amiens, Cologne, and York reached desperately towards the heavens. These names would become symbols of human audacity, faith capable of moving mountains, and engineering genius that defied the very laws of physics, a testament to mankind's relentless pursuit of the divine. Beneath the legendary legends of pious builders, inspired solely by divine will, lies another story, one of massive labour, brilliant calculation, and logistical feats of unprecedented scale. It is a story not merely of stones and mortar, but of human beings, bishops whose vanity was rivaled only by their faith, master masons whose secrets were guarded more jealously than treasure, and countless labourers whose lives and deaths formed the very foundation of these stone giants. Together, they crafted a project spanning a century, a saga of logistics and determination that continues to fascinate even today. Dive into this world where faith was currency, timber was blood, and stone was flesh. Flesh brought to life through the hands of humanity's most ambitious creations. From the first sketches on parchment to the placement of the final cross, crowning a spire soaring into the clouds, every step was a testament to collective ambition. The very air of medieval cities seemed infused with these aspirations, not merely the worldly ambitions of kings seeking new lands, but something far more profound. It was a metaphysical contest, unfolding before the eyes of the entire Christian world. Every city, every bishop, and every influential chapter vied desperately to outdo one another, erecting cathedrals that would be taller, brighter, and more magnificent than any before. This competition was not only a display of piety, but also a potent political and economic tool. The cathedral was more than a sacred edifice. It was the heartbeat of a city, its spiritual centre and vital artery of commerce and influence. These Gothic masterpieces embodied the collective zeal to push the boundaries of human achievement, transforming sacred devotion into a symbol of civic pride and power, shaping the destiny of nations through stone, glass, and unwavering faith. Throughout history, certain grand religious structures have played a multifaceted role in shaping urban life, culture, and power dynamics. These magnificent edifices served as focal points, drawing countless pilgrims whose donations and expenses significantly bolstered the financial stability of the city. Their importance extended beyond mere spiritual centres. They became symbols of authority and influence, hosting the most important church coronations, grand councils, and bustling fairs that attracted traders from far and wide. To own and maintain such a majestic cathedral meant not only possessing a sacred monument, but also wielding considerable sway over both the spiritual and financial realms. While the high-ranking church officials often dreamt of divine glory and worldly prestige, a less conspicuous group worked diligently behind the scenes within scribes' chambers and artisan workshops. It was there that the future creator of these marvels was slowly emerging, a man whose destiny was to transform lofty ambitions into tangible reality. This individual was not officially called an architect in the modern sense. Rather, his designation was that of a master mason. In essence, he embodied multiple roles simultaneously. He was a draftsman, a structural engineer, a project foreman, and a manager all rolled into one. His name rarely found its way into the chronicles preserved for posterity, since all praise was meant to be directed exclusively toward God and the patron who funded the project. Nevertheless, it was precisely his genius that lay behind every intricately designed element of the cathedral, be it each carefully calculated arch or every soaring rib vault that reached towards the heavens. The path toward mastering this craft was neither quick nor simple. It was a journey that began with years of apprenticeship, carrying stones and learning the trade, culminating in decades of study, travel, and absorption of sacred and architectural knowledge. Contrary to what one might think, the process of conceptualization did not start with detailed blueprints in our modern understanding. Instead, the initial planning involved a flexible master plan, rooted in sacred geometry, an abstract blueprint comprised of geometric principles that aimed to embody divine order. Central to this process were simple tools such as a compass and a straight edge, which the master wielded with finesse. From these basic shapes, squares and circles, he would derive the complex structural design of the future building. The art of proportioning, based on the rotation of squares and the construction of equilateral triangles, enabled the master to achieve harmony and structural integrity, which were believed to reflect the divine harmony of the universe itself. The master's sketches on wax tablets or high-quality parchment served as preliminary drawings, illustrating floor plans, cross-sectional views, and schematics of vaults and windows. However, the true scale model of the cathedral, the one-to-one representation, was often created directly on a large, carefully levelled and plastered construction site called the tracing floor. On this expansive platform, the master, assisted by his apprentices, meticulously drew full-size templates for the most complex stone components, such as arch elements, ribs of vaults, and window tracery patterns. This method created a massive physical interface between abstract geometry and practical construction, where geometric shapes transformed into tangible templates, ready for stone cutting. This was like a giant medieval graphic interface, translating the intangible language of sacred proportions into concrete forms that could be directly employed in the building process. Parallel to the design and planning stages, a no less critical struggle took place, securing funds for the ambitious project. The construction of a Gothic cathedral involved astronomical costs that could rival the entire budget of a minor war. The bishop and the cathedral chapter, comprising the highest ecclesiastical officials, were the primary initiators and initial investors, providing revenues from church lands and tithes paid by noble benefactors. Yet, these sources alone were woefully insufficient, often amounting to a mere fraction of the total required funds. As a result, a large-scale fundraising effort ensued, an early form of universal crowdfunding on a planetary scale. Preachers and heralds travelled throughout the diocese and beyond, urging supporters to donate to this divine enterprise. One of the main revenue streams was the sale of indulgences, documents granting forgiveness of sins, sold in exchange for generous contributions toward the cathedral's construction. Supporting these efforts, the church organised relic tours, transporting sacred remains believed to belong to saints around towns and villages, showcasing these holy relics in order to inspire devotion and solicit donations from the faithful. These relics, housed within the cathedral, became focal points of pilgrimage and financial sustenance, helping to gather the necessary resources to bring the ambitious project to life. Every individual who dared to approach the sacred site would leave behind a coin as their offering, regardless of their social standing or financial means. Contributions poured in from all directions, ranging from the last wishes of wealthy townspeople eager to secure their place in paradise after death, to donations from craft guilds. These guilds used their contributions not merely as acts of piety, but also as strategic investments in their future status. They sought to earn the right to have their own chapels or stained glass windows installed in the cathedral, turning their generosity into a form of eternal advertisement. Behind all this lay a sophisticated and complex financial system that demanded meticulous accounting and management. At the heart of this mechanism was a figure akin to a master builder or a chief steward of the church's treasury, responsible for overseeing the entire budget of the construction project. This individual maintained detailed ledger books, thick registers that recorded every single coin spent. Each entry documented the expenses for procuring materials such as lime, paying masons and craftsmen, and providing fodder for draft animals. These financial records, many of which have survived to our days, offer an invaluable glimpse into the economy of medieval construction sites. They reveal how material prices fluctuated over time, how worker strikes could impact the budget, and how poor harvests might halt all progress for several years. Yet, having sufficient funds and a brilliant architectural plan did not guarantee that construction could commence. There was another crucial element: land. Many grand cathedrals were built upon the sites of older, more modest Romanesque churches. Restoring these sacred spaces meant first dismantling the existing structures, a process that had to be carefully phased so as not to interrupt ongoing religious services. When the project involved expanding an existing church, it was often necessary to demolish entire city blocks. Such operations involved lengthy, complex negotiations with property owners, requiring the church to buy out their holdings. This process could stretch over many years and often ended in disputes or legal battles, making the journey to realization fraught with difficulty. In addition to clearing the site, the church had to ensure access routes for countless carts loaded with stones, bricks, and other building materials. Narrow medieval streets simply were not designed for such heavy traffic. This often led to the construction of new roads, the reinforcement of bridges, and negotiations with landowners along the route from quarries to the construction site. In essence, even before the first stone was laid, a flurry of logistical activities would have been underway, comparable in scope and complexity to preparing for a large military campaign. The outcome of this preparatory effort could determine whether the church's ambitious vision would come to life or remain just a blueprint, buried in dusty archives, forgotten by history. All this activity took place in a fragile state of equilibrium, symbolized by the solemn ritual of the bishop, robed in full ceremonial attire. Surrounded by clergy and noble courtiers, he would sprinkle holy water over the land designated for the new house of God. Psalms were chanted, incense wafted through the air, each gesture marking the beginning of a sacred enterprise that would shape the spiritual landscape for generations to come. This solemn act represented not only the start of construction, but also a point of historical and spiritual reference, when divine blessing was invoked to ensure the project's success. However, as the initial ceremonial euphoria faded, reality swiftly shifted into a phase defined not by prayers, but by dirt, sweat, and toil. The most labour-intensive, dirty, and often thankless stage of construction was about to commence: the excavation and earthworks. It was during this phase that the foundation of future grandeur was laid in the muddy, damp ground. Every mistake made at this crucial stage could prove disastrous for the entire project years later, potentially causing costly delays or structural flaws. The very first task was to prepare the construction site, a miniature act of creation itself. This process involved transforming a chaotic, overgrown patch of land into a carefully planned, functional space, ready to support the weight of soaring walls and vaulted ceilings. Clearing away debris, levelling uneven terrain, and setting the groundwork represented a foundational act, one that required patience, precision, and careful coordination. Only after this groundwork was properly laid could the next stages of building, with their towering walls and intricate vaults, begin to take shape, bringing the vision of the master builders closer to reality. The entire construction site was enclosed within a tall wooden fence, not solely to safeguard against thieves, but also to conceal the sacred process of building from prying eyes, and, crucially, to protect the skilled craftsmen's secret techniques. Inside this perimeter, a bustling little settlement took shape, transforming into a temporary city dedicated to the sacred task. Makeshift huts sprouted up to accommodate the numerous workers who travelled from distant towns, creating a communal living and working environment. Nearby, a blacksmith's shop operated tirelessly, where tools were repaired and iron fittings were forged with precision. A carpentry workshop existed as well, manufacturing scaffolding, moulds, and templates essential for the project. Among the many structures, a particularly significant one was the lodge, a spacious barn serving dual purposes, as a dining hall, a resting place, and a sort of command centre for masons and builders. Here, away from the elements, craftsmen could lively discuss their plans, work on detailed templates, and pass down their knowledge to apprentices. Close by, a storage area was designated for keeping valuable building materials, lime, sand, and various tools, while stables and pens housed draft animals necessary for hauling and construction work. Once the site was sufficiently prepared, the real challenge began. The earth had to be excavated to lay the foundation. Without the benefit of modern excavators or bulldozers, this process was painfully slow and arduous. Thousands of labourers, armed with only wooden shovels fitted with iron tips, pickaxes, and woven baskets, dug into the soil with relentless effort. The excavated earth was transported manually, either pushed in handcarts or carried away in baskets, to designated dump sites. The depth of the trench depended on the type of terrain and the anticipated height and load of the future structure. For grand cathedrals, whose walls and towering spires would exert immense pressure on the foundation and ground, the pits often reached depths of 10 or even 12 metres, comparable to the depth of a modern 3-storey building. This phase was inherently dangerous. Collapses sometimes occurred, and groundwater could flood the excavations. To combat water intrusion, builders devised rudimentary drainage systems and relied on simple pumps powered by hand or by horse. A master mason was always present to oversee these operations, personally inspecting the soil and assessing its ability to bear weight. If the ground proved too soft or swampy, innovative engineering solutions had to be employed. One common technique involved creating a dense field of piles driven deep into the earth. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of wooden pilings made from oak or larch were burned to withstand rot and then driven into the ground with primitive manual or mechanical capstans. Heavy pulleys and winches, operated by human labour or draft animals, were used to lift and drop the piles with precision, forming a robust foundation that evenly distributed the future weight of the building. Another method involved creating an artificial stone foundation, where the bottom of the trench was filled with layers of crushed stone, gravel, and broken bricks, each meticulously tamped down and soaked with lime mortar to bind the fill tightly. Only after this base was firm and stable could the actual laying of the foundation commence. This stage was rough but vitally important, requiring skill and utmost care. The builders relied on the most durable and accessible stones they could find nearby, often cobblestones or roughly hewn blocks of sandstone, laid in a bed of thick lime mortar that would, over time, harden into a solid, monolithic mass. The width of the foundation was deliberately larger than the planned walls, creating a sturdy root-like base, reminiscent of the massive roots of an ancient tree, anchoring the entire structure securely to the earth and ensuring its stability for generations to come. In many ancient construction projects, it was common practice to leave voids and passages within the foundational layers of a building. This approach served multiple purposes, reducing the amount of material needed, decreasing the overall weight of the structure, and simplifying later stages of construction. Sometimes, these subterranean tunnels and chambers were transformed over time into fortified vaults, underground chapels for the burial of noble families, or repositories for sacred relics. At this foundational stage, precision was of utmost importance because it laid the groundwork for the entire edifice. It was during this phase that the exact placement of future walls, columns, and load-bearing supports was meticulously determined and marked out. To achieve this, builders used simple yet effective tools such as ropes stretched tightly across the site, basic measuring rods, and simple angle measuring devices like set squares. These methods required an exceptional degree of accuracy because even the slightest deviation at the level of the foundation could result in disastrous distortions hundreds of meters higher up in the structure. Every right angle, every straight line was personally checked by the master architect or master builder, who scrutinized the markings either on parchment sheets or directly etched onto the trench floors, a process that demanded focused attention and unwavering precision. This subterranean phase of construction could extend over many years, consuming enormous amounts of resources, yet remaining completely invisible to the city's inhabitants. The townspeople saw only the perimeter fence, the piles of excavated earth, and the endless stream of carts transporting materials. For those involved in the project, this was a test of unwavering faith and patience. Investment was pouring into the ground, yet tangible results remained elusive, often for years. Experienced craftsmen understood that a cathedral's strength grew downward before it ascended skyward. A solid, reliable foundation was not merely a technical necessity, it was a silent promise that the monumental stone structure born of human dreams and aspirations would withstand storms, the relentless passage of time, and natural disasters alike. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, an invisible war was unfolding. The builders were engaged in a relentless struggle against the earth itself, an arduous, epic battle that took place hundreds of kilometers away from the city. This war was waged over the mountains, the raw material needed to give form and substance to the grand project. Stone, the essential element of the cathedral's body and bones, was the beginning and end of its construction. Extracting and transporting this stone proved to be one of the most complex and costly tasks in the entire project, demanding extraordinary logistical efforts. Choosing the right quarry was a decision of strategic importance, a choice that would influence not only the cathedral's beauty, but also its longevity. Before opening a new quarry, thorough geological surveys were conducted. Expert stone masons, possessing deep knowledge of petrology, travelled through the surrounding regions, examining exposed rock outcroppings and questioning local inhabitants about the terrain. Their keen interest extended to every aspect of the stone, its colour, grain size, hardness, resistance to freezing temperatures, and vulnerability to erosion. The ideal type was often a fine-grained limestone or sandstone, soft enough to be intricately carved, but durable enough to withstand the massive loads once the cathedral was complete. It was commonplace to use different types of stone for different parts of the cathedral. More durable, expensive stones were reserved for load-bearing columns and supports, while softer, more decorative varieties adorned sculptures and ornamental details. The most affordable, rugged stones were reserved for the outer wall's core filling. Among renowned quarries, the cane stone from Normandy gained legendary status. Its creamy hue and superior quality made it a favourite across Europe, often referred to as the Queen of Building Materials. The cane stone was exported to England for the construction of Canterbury Cathedral and Westminster Abbey, highlighting its significance and prestige. Once a quarry was selected, the church would lease or purchase the land for extraction. From that moment, a small settlement sprang up around the site, governed by its own rules and hierarchical structure. Life in these remote quarry towns was harsh and perilous, marked by the constant challenges of working in rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and the inherent dangers of stone extraction and transportation. Among the ranks of workers involved in stone extraction, the quarrymen, or stone miners, formed a distinct and specialised caste. Their labour was notoriously gruelling, almost hellish in its intensity. Armed with only primitive tools such as wedges, hammers, crowbars, and pickaxes, they relentlessly carved into the hard stone of mountain cliffs. The method of quarrying was surprisingly simple, yet ingeniously effective. First, workers would draw a line on the surface of the rock, indicating the future point of fracture. Following this, they would carefully and methodically chisel a series of deep holes along this marked line using chisels and hammers. Into these holes, they inserted dry wooden wedges, which were then generously soaked with water. As the water-laden wood absorbed moisture and expanded, enormous pressure was generated, enough to split apart even the largest blocks of stone. During winter, a different technique was employed. Instead of wedges, they would pour water into the drilled holes, allowing it to freeze and expand, producing a similar force capable of splitting the rock apart. The resulting piece, separated from the mountain mass, was essentially a rough, semi-finished block. The next challenge was to break this block down into smaller, more manageable pieces, roughly of a standard size suitable for transport. This task was carried out by separate teams of workers. Following the rough extraction, the stones underwent primary shaping. To reduce weight and facilitate handling, workers would roughly pare down each block directly at the quarry site, giving it an approximate form that would serve as a basis for further refinement. Each stone block was marked with a personal emblem or symbol, a kind of signature from the mason, that served dual purposes, as an indicator of quality and as a foundation for subsequent payment. These marks, which can still be observed on the walls of medieval cathedrals today, functioned much like autographs, a signature of craftsmanship left by master artisans of that era. Once this stage was complete, the most daunting logistical challenge arose, transporting the enormous stones from their place of origin to construction sites. The cost of delivering stone often surpassed several times the expense of quarrying it. Such was the difficulty involved. There were two primary methods of transportation, overland and via water. Overland transportation was slow, arduous, and exceedingly expensive. Stone blocks were loaded onto large 2- or 4-wheeled carts, which were drawn by teams of animals, ranging from maybe 8 to as many as 20 oxen. Medieval roads, if they could be called that, consisted chiefly of earthen tracks that quickly turned into mud after each rain, making progress painfully slow. A convoy of stone could seldom travel more than a few kilometres per day. The carts frequently broke down under the heavy weight, and animals often collapsed from exhaustion, complicating the journey further. Building new roads, constructing makeshift ford crossings, and reinforcing bridges to facilitate transport became necessary, placing a heavy burden on project budgets. Whenever possible, the ancient builders preferred water routes because they were considerably cheaper and faster. Rivers played a critical role in medieval Europe's transportation network, functioning as the primary arteries for moving heavy loads. Quarry owners sought to position their sites as close as possible to navigable waterways. Once the stones reached the riverbank, they were transported by specially equipped docks, where primitive wooden cranes were used to load the stones into flat-bottomed barges. These boats could carry loads that would otherwise require dozens of carts and hundreds of oxen to transport over land. Such waterborne transport was markedly more economical and swift. Yet it was not without hazards. Barges might run aground, encounter storms, or even capsize under the weight of their cargo. Navigation was often seasonally limited. Some rivers could be navigated only during certain times of the year when water levels were high enough. Despite these risks, the implementation of river transport systems along the Seine, Loire, Rhine, and Thames enabled the realization of the most ambitious construction projects of the Middle Ages. These waterways made it feasible to undertake monumental building endeavours that would have been nearly impossible through solely terrestrial routes, thus shaping the course of medieval architectural development. The stone was not the only resource that needed transporting to the construction site. Equally important was wood. A vast amount of timber was required, not only for scaffolding and roof trusses, but also for templates, cranes, and carts. This meant that entire forests, comprising mighty oaks, pines, and firs, had to be cut down, processed, and moved. Oak, in particular, was highly valued for its exceptional strength and durability, making it the preferred choice for the most load-bearing and critical structural components. The timber was often floated down rivers or transported on carts drawn by animals, forming a complex logistics network crucial to the construction process. The harvesting and supply of timber had become an independent industry, closely monitored and controlled by feudal lords, as the forests were located on their lands. In addition to stone and timber, one of the most vital materials in medieval construction was mortar, specifically a lime-based mixture used as a binding agent. Producing this mortar required obtaining quicklime, which was made by burning limestone in specially constructed kilns. These kilns were strategically situated either near the limestone quarries or directly at the construction sites to facilitate efficient supply chains. The process of lime burning was labour-intensive. It demanded vast quantities of firewood and lasted several days. Once the limestone was sufficiently burned and turned into quicklime, artisans mixed it with sand and water to produce a mortar, an essential component of any substantial building. The quality of this mortar was paramount because it determined the durability and stability of the entire structure. Craftsmanship and tradition guarded the secrets of mixing the right proportions and selecting suitable additives. Sometimes, for enhanced strength, master builders would incorporate materials such as egg whites, curd, or even animal blood into the mortar. These practices were carefully kept within the circle of expert masons, passed down through generations as invaluable knowledge. Sand and gravel, which served as fillers in the mortar, were sourced from rivers or traditional quarries, further integrating natural resources into the construction chain. Thus, the construction site of a cathedral transformed into a colossal logistical hub, the central point where dozens, if not hundreds, of routes converged. Along these routes flowed a continuous stream of essential materials: stone, timber, lime, sand, gravel, as well as iron for tools and provisions for the workers. Managing this intricate network required exceptional organizational skills from the master of the workshop. He was responsible for negotiating contracts with subcontractors, chartering ships, hiring carriers, and overseeing the condition of roads and storage facilities. Even a minor disruption, a drought, a river drying up, a feudal conflict blocking a supply route, could halt all work entirely. This invisible task of orchestrating supplies was as crucial as the master mason's artistic talents or sculpting skills. Without the unwavering and timely flow of resources, even the most brilliant architectural vision would remain unrealized, a mere dream. Once the foundation was laid and the first loads of stone and timber arrived at the site, the true miracle began. The construction came alive. Voices echoed, the ringing of steel, the creak of winches, and the dull percussion of hammers filled the air. No longer was this just a patch of earth. It transformed into a complex social organism, operating under its own laws, with a strict hierarchy. If the cathedral was compared to a piece of frozen music, then its builders resembled a vast orchestra, each musician playing their distinct part. Under the baton of a masterful conductor, the master mason, this chaotic symphony was transformed into a harmonious masterpiece. At the very summit of this hierarchy was, as we have noted, the master mason himself, an elite figure within the construction realm. Often he was educated and literate, possessing knowledge of Latin and the basics of theology, which enabled him to communicate seamlessly with ecclesiastical patrons. His expertise in geometry and mechanics was almost mystical in the eyes of ordinary workers, giving him a reputation bordering on the divine. This master was not a typical manual labourer. He worked predominantly with his mind. His primary tools were knowledge and intellect, guiding the entire process with strategic insight and deep understanding. His decisions shaped the very essence of the building, making him an indispensable figure. More than a builder, he was an artist, engineer, and visionary whose skill and wisdom turned raw materials into timeless works of art and spiritual symbols. Throughout most of his days, he remained within his workshop, a space that served as both his sanctuary and command center. Here, he tirelessly dedicated himself to designing detailed sketches and templates, meticulously calculating dimensions and forces, and planning subsequent stages of construction. Every major decision, from selecting the finest stones to approving the intricate designs of the sculptures, was his sole responsibility. bearing the weight of authority and expertise that no one dared to challenge. His reputation, built on these decisions, was unassailable, and his remuneration reflected his invaluable role. He earned a sum that, for those times, was considered substantial. Often he was provided with a comfortable residence and a devoted cohort of servants to attend to his needs, easing the burden of daily life. Just as today, eminent architects or star athletes are lured away to new teams with tempting offers, the greatest artisans of his craft were enticed from city to city, lured by the promise of better conditions, larger commissions, and higher pay. Working just a level below the master, there were his trusted deputies, the so-called journeymen or foremen. These men were seasoned stonemasons, having advanced through years of experience, accumulating skills and responsibility that made them vital to the project's success. Each of them was entrusted with overseeing a specific segment of the work. One supervised the wall construction, another was responsible for shaping and installing the arches, a third managed operations at the quarry. These foremen acted as the vital link between the master's visionary ideas and the countless labourers executing the physical tasks. They distributed work assignments, ensured the quality of every stone laid, kept to the strict deadlines, mediated disputes among workers, and enforced discipline when needed. Their authority was respected, and their leadership essential to maintaining momentum. Beneath this layer was the core of the workforce, the skilled bricklayers and stone setters, true artisans of their craft. These craftsmen were divided into two main categories, each with specialised roles. The first group, the stone cutters, worked directly on the ground within the workshop yard, transforming rough blocks transported from the quarry into precisely shaped elements necessary for the monument's complex architectural details. Using compasses, squares, and templates designed by the master himself, they performed delicate and exacting work, shaping each stone to fit perfectly within the intricate mosaic of the structure, a task demanding not only many years of dedicated training, but also a keen eye for precision. Each stone cutter marked their finished piece with a personal signature, a unique symbol burned or chiselled into the stone, serving as a mark of their craftsmanship and pride. The second category comprised the stone setters, whose domain was the scaffolding and the higher reaches of the construction. Working amidst towering wooden frameworks, these artisans carefully carried the processed stones up on their shoulders or hoists, then set them into place within the walls or the arches below, securing each with mortar. Their work required not only impeccable accuracy, but also formidable physical strength and a fearless attitude, for they often balanced high above the ground on shaky scaffolds. Their role was crucial in giving the structure its form and stability, combining artistry with raw physical effort. Meanwhile, a vital and equally esteemed guild operated alongside the masons, the carpenters. Their contribution was foundational to the entire project, as without their skills, the cathedral could not have risen from the ground. They constructed and continuously extended the towering scaffolds, the massive wooden frameworks that surrounded the edifice like a giant web, supporting every stone. They crafted sturdy frames called ring frames, which formed the backbone of the arches and vaults, holding the heavy stones in place until the mortar hardened. These wooden structures bore the full weight of the stonework during its delicate assembly phase, preventing collapse and ensuring safety and precision. Carpenters also designed and maintained the lifting devices, such as cranes and pulleys, assembled the roof trusses, fixed the doors and windows, and built temporary support systems necessary for the rapid and safe progression of work. Their skill was as highly valued as that of the stone craftsmen, for their expertise directly affected the speed and quality of the construction. In the same spatial and temporal orbit operated the blacksmiths, who represented a vital link in this intricate organizational symphony. Residing in their humming, smoky workshops, filled with the scent of burnt coal and heated metal, these artisans were masters of iron. They forged and sharpened thousands of tools used daily by masons and carpenters: chisels, hammers, picks, saws, drills, and other instruments crucial for shaping stone and wood. Their craftsmanship extended beyond tools. Blacksmiths produced chains, hooks, and lifting rings for cranes, as well as window grills, door hinges, and locks. Most importantly, they manufactured countless iron clamps, anchors, and ties, which served as internal reinforcement for the stonework at the most critical points, functioning akin to modern-day internal rebar. These iron fittings ensured the resilience and longevity of the structure, preventing cracks or collapses that could threaten the entire edifice. Their work demanded not only skill and ingenuity, but also an understanding of structural needs, as they provided the essential hardware that solidified the entire construction process. As the towering walls rose higher and higher, a diverse array of specialists gradually appeared on the construction site, each contributing their unique skills to the grand effort. Among them were master glassmakers, true alchemists, who transformed ordinary sand and powdered minerals into vibrant, colourful glass. These artisans carefully crafted intricate stained glass panels, which, like parts of a giant mosaic, were then assembled into immense, breathtaking stained glass windows that would adorn the cathedral. Alongside them laboured roofers, who meticulously covered the vast wooden framework of the roof with durable tiles or slate, creating a resilient shield against the elements and ensuring the structure's protection from rain, wind, and snow. Often, sculptors, many of whom hailed from the most talented stone carving backgrounds, bestowed the facades and cornices with elaborate carvings, intricately decorated with reliefs that seemed to tell stories carved in stone. Their work turned the building's exterior into a kind of monumental book, a stone Bible, readable for those who could not read words, but could see the stories etched into every surface. At the very base of this architectural pyramid, in stark contrast, was a vast, anonymous army of unskilled labourers. These were day labourers, peasants seeking work in the city, wandering folk arriving with little more than the clothes on their backs. They performed the most demanding and dirty tasks, mixing mortar, carrying heavy stones, turning the cranks of cranes, and clearing debris. Their labour was inexpensive, their lives brief and often harsh, yet their collective effort was the very foundation upon which the entire colossal project depended. All of these workers were united within a complex system of guilds and craft fraternities. A guild was far more than a union. It was a brotherhood, a tightly knit community that regulated every aspect of a craftsman's life. The guild established strict standards for quality, fixed prices for work, and controlled the number of masters and apprentices, preventing oversaturation of the labour market and maintaining high craftsmanship standards. Beyond the economic role, guilds also served as social safety nets, providing aid to widows and orphans of their members and caring for the ill. The path to becoming a master mason or artisan was arduous and long. A young boy entering the trade would serve as an apprentice or journeyman for 7 or 10 years, learning every detail of the craft. Afterward, he would become a wandering journeyman, travelling from city to city and from one construction site to another, gaining diverse experience and honing his skills. Only after creating a masterpiece, an exemplary work that demonstrated mastery, and passing rigorous examinations, could he attain the status of master and establish his own workshop or workshop. Such a system ensured that expert knowledge and traditional techniques were preserved and passed down through generations, fostering a culture of continuous excellence. The bustling construction site of the cathedral was a melting pot, an incubation chamber where master craftsmen from various countries converged, exchanging techniques and ideas that spurred rapid architectural innovation across Europe. To the medieval eye, witnessing stone blocks weighing multiple tons, delicately carved capitals and entire sections of arches gracefully, almost weightlessly, ascend hundreds of feet, was nothing short of magical. Yet behind this spectacle lay cold engineering calculations and ingeniously simple mechanisms that allowed a small group of workers to manipulate weights and loads that would have been impossible with mere brute force. This was an era powered by the triumph of the lever, pulley, and wheel, fundamental principles of mechanics that forever changed the possibilities of construction. At the heart of every high-rise scaffolding stood a lifting device, the crane. Medieval engineers employed several types of cranes, but the most powerful and widespread was the treadwheel crane, sometimes called a Bellici wheel. Imagine a gigantic wheel, about 4 or 5 meters in diameter, resembling a giant hamster wheel. Only enormity and strength made it capable of lifting heavy loads. Inside this massive wheel, 1 or 2 workers would step onto wooden crossbars, walking in circles to turn the wheel, which in turn operated the hoisting mechanism, raising massive stones and beams with remarkable ease. Their muscular strength turned the wheel, which, through a system of oxen and gears, wound the lifting rope onto a drum. This mechanism, known since the days of the Roman Empire, made it possible to hoist loads weighing several tons. Frequently, 2 such wheels were mounted on a single axle, doubling the lifting capacity. The work of crane operators was monotonous and extremely perilous. A single misstep could result in the mechanism drawing a person into its teeth or causing them to fall from a great height. If the rope snapped, the wheel would spin backward at a frantic speed, leaving no chance of rescue for those trapped within. The cranes themselves were masterpieces of carpentry, skillfully crafted structures. They could be stationary, firmly anchored on the upper tier of scaffolding, or movable, capable of repositioning as needed. A special variation was the rotary crane, whose jib could rotate freely, allowing workers not only to lift, but also to shift loads laterally across the construction site. For smaller loads, such as mortar, tools, or individual bricks, more straightforward systems comprising blocks and block and tackle pulleys, operated manually, were used. A block and tackle, an arrangement of several movable and fixed pulleys through which a rope is threaded, enabled a single worker to lift weights many times heavier than their own body mass. Equally vital as the lifting mechanisms were the construction scaffolding systems. The scaffolds of a Gothic cathedral resembled an entire forest, an intricate 3-dimensional structure that grew in tandem with the building itself. They were made from sturdy logs connected with ropes or metal clamps, serving multiple crucial purposes. First, they provided working platforms for masons and stone setters, enabling them to work at dizzying heights. Second, they formed supports for temporary roads and ramps, along which carts carried mortar and smaller materials. Third, these scaffolds often housed the lifting devices necessary for hoisting heavy stones and construction elements. The scaffolding structures were carefully designed. Their supports were inserted into specially drilled holes in the stonework, which were left open during construction. When these scaffolds were disassembled and transported upward to higher levels, such holes were either filled or left visible, many of which can still be seen on the facades of numerous cathedrals today. Perhaps the most ingenious invention that made the realization of Gothic ideals, creating vast, luminous interior spaces, possible was the use of flying scaffolds, or flying buttresses. A Gothic cathedral's frame was a system of supporting arches, where the immense weight of stone vaults was not borne by the walls, that could be pierced with huge stained glass windows, but by pointed supports, columns, and flying buttresses. But how could such stone vaults be constructed at heights of 30 or 40 metres above the ground? This is precisely where the flying scaffolds came into play. They were robust wooden frameworks, precisely shaped to match the curvature of the future arch or rib of the vault. Constructed on the ground, these framework structures were then hoisted up using cranes and securely installed between the supporting columns and walls. On this wooden mould, the masons laid the wedge-shaped stones of the vault, starting from the supports and progressing toward the centre, where the keystone was placed. The mortar binding the stones needed several weeks, sometimes even months, to fully harden and achieve the necessary strength to withstand the weight. This elaborate system of scaffolding, gears, and careful stonework enabled Gothic architects to realise their visionary designs, creating towering, luminous spaces filled with light and grace. Each element worked in harmony, muscles, wood, and ingenuity, bringing to life structures that have stood for centuries and continue to inspire awe. Throughout the entire construction process, it was ultimately the wooden pulleys that bore the weight of hundreds of tons of stone. The most tense and emotionally charged moments on the building site were during the disassembly of these pulleys. If the master's calculations were correct, the stone vault would hang freely in the air, beginning to suspend itself independently and gradually transferring the load onto the supporting pillars. In contrast, any mistake in the calculations or assembly could lead to a catastrophic collapse, the vault collapsing with a deafening crash, claiming lives and turning years of painstaking labour into ruins. Such a project demanded from the master not only an exceptional intuition, but also profound practical knowledge in mechanics and material strength. Every element needed careful calculation, be it the tensile strength of the ropes, the lifting capacity of the cranes, or the load-bearing capacity of the scaffolds and the pulleys themselves. These weren't purely theoretical insights derived from books. They were hard-earned lessons accumulated over centuries through trial and error, passed down from master to apprentice through direct experience. The construction site was, in fact, a vast living laboratory, continually generating and refining engineering solutions. When we reflect on soaring stone vaults beneath the clouds of cathedrals in Beauvais or Amiens, it is important to remember not only the religious fervour that inspired their creators, but also the ingenuity of unsung engineers, those anonymous geniuses who, wielding only ropes, wood, and wheels, managed to triumph over gravity itself. Over the span of 2 generations, the walls of these new cathedrals steadily reached toward the heavens, embodying a powerful symbol of unshakable faith and the prosperity of the city. It often seemed as if divine blessing was upon this ambitious endeavour, supporting their daring efforts. Yet, beyond the sacred enclosure, the outside world remained far from peaceful or stable. Soon the shadows of war, famine, and deadly diseases loomed, threatening to test the very faith of those builders with fire and blood. A project meant to span decades inherently harboured vulnerabilities to the sudden calamities that could befall medieval society. Among these dangers, fire was arguably the most deadly and unpredictable enemy. The construction site resembled a giant powder keg. Thousands of cubic metres of dry wood and scaffolding and pulley systems, storage sheds filled with straw needed for winter insulation, and an open forge in the blacksmith's hut. Any careless spark from a misplaced torch or a lightning strike could, within minutes, turn the entire site into an inferno. The temporary wooden roofs covering completed sections intended to shield the work from weather, were particularly vulnerable. A single fire could obliterate in a night what it took years to build: expensive lifting machines, the scaffolding, and worst of all, the high temperatures could cause the already placed stones to crack and lose their strength. In the aftermath of such a disaster, it was necessary not just to rebuild, but to dismantle and replace every damaged and unreliable structure. The history of many cathedral constructions is, therefore, also a story of relentless struggle against fire. The renowned Salisbury Cathedral, for example, endured multiple catastrophic fires, each time requiring near complete reconstruction. These fires were seen by contemporaries not only as material losses, but also as spiritual tragedies, perceived as divine punishment for human sins. Another silent, yet equally lethal threat to the project was hunger. The medieval economy was fundamentally agrarian and extremely dependent on the unpredictable forces of weather. A poor harvest or a harsh winter could quickly lead to famine, further threatening the stability and progress of the ambitious architectural endeavours. Thus, behind every stone laid and every arch erected, there loomed the constant challenge of nature's wrath and social instability, testing the unwavering faith and resilience of the builders. Over the course of several years, periods of severe drought or, conversely, relentless heavy rains could lead to devastating crop failures. Such failures often resulted in widespread famine, causing prices for bread, the primary staple of the population, to skyrocket to unprecedented heights. Resources that might have been allocated for constructing important buildings were instead diverted to procure enough food to feed starving cities. As a consequence, the flow of donations from peasants and small-town residents gradually dwindled or even ceased altogether. Meanwhile, the labourers themselves, weakened and emaciated from inadequate nutrition, either worked with less efficiency or abandoned their posts altogether in search of sustenance. As a result, construction projects would come to a halt, often remaining idle for many years. The sites would be overgrown with weeds, and the unfinished walls, exposed to the elements, began to erode slowly under rain and wind, further undermining the stability of the structures. Yet, the most formidable ordeal that Europe ever faced was the Black Death. In the middle of the 14th century, the devastating pandemic of plague swept across the continent, claiming the lives of an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. This catastrophe of biblical proportions changed the course of history forever. When the epidemic struck, construction sites fell silent. Skilled craftsmen, whose expertise was more valuable than gold, perished alongside common labourers in vast numbers. Entire guilds of masons and carpenters disbanded as their members succumbed to the deadly disease. Survivors, horrified by the devastation, fled from cities ravaged by the plague, leaving their work unfinished. The economic system itself was paralysed. Commerce ceased, and financial activity ground to a halt. For decades, the grand architectural projects across Europe were frozen in time, their progress halted indefinitely. When the epidemic eventually receded, the continent faced an urgent and severe shortage of craftsmen and labourers. The cost of labour soared sharply. Surviving artisans demanded far higher wages to sustain themselves and their families, which in turn triggered a new wave of inflation. This made resuming construction even more challenging, as rising costs and economic instability hindered progress. Amid all this turmoil, perpetual war served as a constant backdrop to medieval life. Feudal conflicts, crusades, and the 100 Years' War between England and France directly affected construction efforts. First, war demanded enormous financial resources. Kings and feudal lords levied taxes on cities and the church, squeezing out funds that could otherwise have been used for procuring stone, paying workers, or purchasing materials. Second, wars required manpower. Craftsmen and peasants were mobilized into armies, pulling them away from peaceful labor and construction work. Third, the very nature of military campaigns posed a direct threat to ongoing building projects. An approaching enemy army might lay siege to a city, turning unfinished cathedrals into prime targets for siege engines like catapults and trebuchets. A siege cut off supplies, effectively condemning the construction effort to stagnation and decay. Accordingly, the story of building a cathedral mirrors a tumultuous, interrupted journey from the foundation to the spire. It resembles a jagged line, repeatedly broken by fires, famines, plagues, and wars. Sometimes, construction would halt for 50, 70, or even 100 years. During this interval, several generations of masons and craftsmen would pass away. Clients and patrons often died without seeing the project completed. Blueprints were lost, and architectural fashions changed over time. Frequently, a cathedral begun in the early Gothic style might later be finished in a flamboyant, high Gothic, or even a later decorative style, resulting in a curious eclecticism that can still be observed today. The remarkable resilience of these projects, how they survived upheavals, were reborn from the ashes, and persisted despite repeated setbacks, serves as a testimony not only to the flexibility and ingenuity of medieval logistics, but also to the extraordinary strength of the idea that ignited such grand visions. Each renewal of work after a new crisis became an act of defiance against fate itself, a testament to the enduring strength of faith and human perseverance, proving that such qualities are mightier than fire, plague, and sword. Decades passed, and finally the skeletal frame of the cathedral, its columns, arches, and buttresses, was completed. Now, the next stage began. This mighty yet inherently soulless structure was soon to be brought to life, to gain both flesh and spirit. The work that followed was a delicate dance, where engineering calculations gradually yielded to pure artistry, and craft transformed into a form of sacred expression. It was an era marked by the creation of intricate stone lacework and glass tapestries that turned the building into a treasure chest, filled with light and profound meaning. The pinnacle of the mason's craftsmanship was the construction of ribbed vaults, a hallmark innovation of Gothic architecture. These vaults not only permitted lighter, more graceful structures, but also infused the interior space with an incredible sense of movement and upward aspiration. The ribs, those stone ribs of the vault, formed the essential framework. Initially, master builders meticulously laid them on temporary molds called templates, carefully shaping each arc. Afterwards, the spaces between these ribs, known as infill or pinfalls, were filled with smaller, precisely fitted stones, which required extraordinary skill in cutting and fitting. Creating the complex star-shaped or fan vaults, characteristic of late Gothic architecture, was akin to solving a three-dimensional puzzle of daunting difficulty. Each stone was unique and had to be placed with millimeter precision to ensure perfect alignment and stability. Simultaneously with the construction of the vaults, work on the cathedral's exterior was underway. The facades, especially the grand western facade, transformed into vast stone books, their pages embellished with hundreds, sometimes thousands of sculptures. Portal frames, tympana, cornices, and consoles, all were covered in intricate carvings. These decorative elements depicted scenes from the Old and New Testaments, lives of saints, allegories of virtues and vices, as well as zodiac signs and symbols representing various craft guilds. It was as if the cathedral itself became a visual Bible, an accessible, vivid catechism for for those who could not read. The creation of these sculptures was entrusted to the finest artisans, whose work was held in extremely high regard. They worked from detailed sketches and approved sketches called capitula, but often added their own artistic touches, infusing the figures with individual character. Statues of saints and angels stood side by side with grotesque chimeras and gargoyles, which served both decorative and practical purposes. They channeled rainwater away from the building's walls. However, the true soul of a Gothic cathedral was embodied by its stained glass windows. While Romanesque churches resembled fortresses of faith, with thick walls and narrow slitted openings, Gothic cathedrals resembled lush urban greenhouses. Thanks to the revolutionary frame-based construction, the walls no longer had to bear the entire load, allowing architects to carve out vast openings, windows that sometimes spanned nearly the entire height of the nave, from column to column. Filling these enormous window spaces with coloured glass was a highly complex, labour-intensive and expensive process, involving skilled artisans from multiple disciplines. The process began in specialised glass-blowing workshops. Glass was produced by melting sands in clay pots inside specially designed furnaces. The fundamental ingredients were silica sand and plant ashes, known as potash. To add colour to the glass, artisans introduced metal oxides into the molten material. Cobalt produced a rich blue, copper yielded ruby red shades, manganese provided purple hues, while iron gave yellows and greens. This meticulous craftsmanship resulted in the vibrant, luminous stained glass that bestowed the cathedral with an almost otherworldly glow, transforming the play of light inside into a divine spectacle. Creating a pure and evenly distributed colour in stained glass was an extremely challenging task. In medieval times, glass was often filled with bubbles and irregularities, yet paradoxically, these imperfections contributed to its unique, lively character. During its production, molten glass was blown either into a cylindrical shape, which was then sliced and flattened into sheets, or spun into discs using the so-called moon glass technique. Once cooled, these coloured glass sheets were transported to workshops dedicated to stained glass art. Here, the artist called the cartonnier would carefully draw life-sized sketches of the future stained glass window directly on a work table, creating what was known as a carton. This template detailed the outlines of every component and indicated their specific colours. Following this, the glazier, or Reischik, would meticulously cut small pieces from the coloured glass sheets, shaping them to match the contours indicated on the carton. To achieve this, he employed a heated iron rod and specialised tongs, working with great precision and a steady hand. This stage demanded not only skill, but also a keen eye, as each fragment had to fit perfectly within the overall design. The next phase involved painting. The already cut pieces of glass were decorated with a dark, opaque paint called guzel, or guzal, which consisted of crushed glass mixed with copper oxide or similar oxidizing agents, often derived from substances like wine or vinegar. Fine details such as facial features, facial expressions, folds in clothing, and intricate patterns were carefully painted onto the glass surfaces. This paint was not transparent, but allowed for the creation of models and the illusion of light and shadow, giving depth and realistic detail to the images. Once the painting was complete, each piece was fired in a kiln to permanently fuse the paint to the glass, ensuring durability and vibrancy of the colours. The final assembly resembled putting together a mosaic, where the painted and fired glass pieces were joined with strips of lead, known for their malleability and suitability for creating complex, flowing shapes. These lead strips, called cames, were flexible enough to connect the most intricate forms and were soldered at the joints with tin to secure the structure. The assembled panel, at this stage, remained somewhat flexible. To enhance its rigidity and ensure it could withstand installation and environmental factors, the entire panel was encased within a sturdy metal framework, which was then affixed within the stone openings of the window. The cost of creating stained glass windows was astronomically high. Blue cobalt and red ruby pigments, for instance, were valued as if they were pure gold. Funding a single large rose window could equate in expense to purchasing an entire estate. As a result, the patrons commissioning these masterpieces were often monarchs, noblemen, or wealthy guilds of craftsmen. They frequently seized the opportunity to immortalize themselves by placing their coats of arms or images of themselves as donors at the bottom of the window. It was common to see figures kneeling in prayer, appearing reverent before the Virgin Mary or their patron saint, serving both as an act of devotion and as a lasting testament to their piety and status. Once installed, the stained glass transformed the interior of the cathedral into a space filled with a mystical, shimmering light. This light shifted and played across the surfaces throughout the day, changing as the sun moved across the sky. It was not merely illumination, but a new, divine kind of light, as described by Abad Sugier, a symbol of divine presence that seemed to dematerialize the stone walls, elevating the observer from the earthly realm to a celestial plane. This enchanting, radiant glow passing through the glass tapestries, combined with soaring architecture and the sounds of organ music alongside Gregorian chants, created an overwhelming emotional experience. To this day, even after nearly 8 centuries, the mere sight of these grand Gothic cathedrals' stained glass windows can still move hearts, filling visitors with awe and reverence. It was the year 1244, more than a century since the first stone had been laid, when the construction of these majestic structures first began. Over the decades, 3, sometimes even 4 generations of craftsmen toiled on their scaffolding, tirelessly working to bring these visions of divine beauty to life, weaving together artistry, faith, and craftsmanship into breathtaking masterpieces that would stand as enduring symbols of spiritual devotion. In the early days, a boy tasked with hauling buckets of mortar and stone gradually grew into a grey-haired master, passing down his mastery to the next generation of builders. Over time, the cathedral ceased to be merely a construction project. It transformed into a vital part of the city's very fabric and identity. It became a silent witness to the countless moments that defined human life in the community, from births and weddings to farewells and funerals. Finally, a significant milestone was reached. From the highest tower, the last scaffolding was removed, revealing the cathedral in all its majestic splendour. The sound of bells filled the air, their deep chimes resonating across the tiled rooftops, announcing the culmination of decades of tireless labour. But what truly had been built over those 100 years? It was more than just a stone and glass structure. What rose before the city was, in reality, a universe unto itself. Looking at it from an economic perspective, the cathedral's construction served as a powerful engine of growth. It generated employment for thousands of craftsmen and labourers, sparking the development of various trades, from metalworking and carpentry to textiles and clothing production for those involved in the building process. The endeavour also catalysed improvements in transportation infrastructure, encouraging the expansion of roads and port facilities to facilitate the arrival of materials. Additionally, it fostered advancements in financial systems, such as the development of credit and meticulous bookkeeping practices, which supported the immense scale and organisation of the project. A city hosting such a grand cathedral inevitably became a pilgrimage destination and a thriving trading hub, ensuring economic prosperity that could sustain generations. From a technological stand, the cathedral's construction site resembled a medieval Silicon Valley, a vibrant epicenter of innovation and experimental engineering. Here, pioneering solutions were devised, many of which outstripped the technological knowledge of the period by a full century. The empirical insights gained in statics, mechanics, materials resistance, and structural stability, collected by anonymous masters whose names have been lost to history, laid the foundational principles for future scientific engineering. The complex geometric calculations, intricate architectural designs, and structural solutions practiced here contributed profoundly to the evolution of practical mathematics. Managing vast teams of workers, coordinating the flow of raw materials, and orchestrating the entire construction process laid down early principles of what we now recognize as project management and logistics. From a social vantage point, the cathedral acted as a melting pot, uniting people from diverse social classes and backgrounds, even from different regions or countries. It became a communal force, binding the city's inhabitants together around a shared, lofty goal. Guilds and craft associations involved in the construction project strengthened their influence and reinforced civic consciousness, sowing the seeds for a future civic society based on cooperation and collective achievement. Of course, the most enduring legacy of the cathedral remains its spiritual and cultural significance. This was no ordinary place of worship. It embodied the collective knowledge, faith, and aspirations of medieval mankind. Its architecture was, in essence, a form of theology expressed in stone and glass. The sculptures depicted stories and historical narratives, while stained glass windows revealed mystical visions and divine mysteries. Beyond its religious functions, the cathedral served as an educational hub, where the earliest universities took shape within its scholastic institutions. It was also a theatrical stage for religious dramas and liturgies, and a concert hall echoing with polyphonic music of the period. Historians often differ in their assessments of such colossal undertakings. Some see the cathedral as an ultimate symbol of boundless faith and human collective effort, a testament to what people can accomplish when united by a divine purpose. Others, more critical, point out that these grand edifices also functioned as instruments of ecclesiastical authority and social control, with the enormous costs placed heavily on ordinary citizens' shoulders. These resources, critics argue, could have been better invested in addressing societal needs or infrastructure, rather than on monumental displays of faith. As with many historic achievements, the truth probably lies somewhere in between, blending admiration for the artistic and spiritual heights reached with acknowledgement of their social and political complexities. Cathedrals embodied much more than mere architectural constructs. They symbolized the intertwining of faith, authority, ingenuity, and human pride. Today, standing before masterpieces like Notre Dame or Cologne Cathedral, we often see only their final, awe-inspiring form, timeless and majestic. Yet, behind each stone lies an extraordinary story, a complex saga woven with determination and ingenuity. It is a story of meticulous logistics that managed to connect remote wildernesses, rugged quarries, and bustling city centres, uniting them into one cohesive building site. It recounts the brilliance of visionary engineers who mastered the art of controlling gravity using nothing more than wood and ropes, transforming them into tools of monumental creation. Moreover, it is a tale of thousands of anonymous men and women, workers whose sweat, blood, and unwavering faith over the course of 100 years gradually carved out these stone marvels. Though they left no personal names behind, their legacy speaks volume. It is a silent yet powerful message passed through the corridors of history. This message demonstrates what humanity can achieve when driven by a grand dream and willing to dedicate multiple generations' worth of effort to its realization. As long as these stone giants stand, these awe-inspiring symbols of human ambition, the memory of their creators will endure, inspiring future generations. I appreciate you spending your time with us, exploring this magnificent epoch of human history. If you found this story as captivating as I did, I encourage you to stay connected for more journeys into the past. And please, share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these great cathedrals made the deepest impression on you? Your opinion is invaluable to us. Until next time.